Jeremy is the co-founder of neuroawareness.com, the aim of which is to apply discoveries, social sciences research, everything coming from social sciences research on the brain to conflict resolution and prevention. He's also an international mediator who works with JAMS International and with other organizations worldwide. You have the floor.
Hello, everybody, and thank you to the organizers for the honor of being able to celebrate today with all of you in this way. What I wanted to do today is to talk to you a bit about neurobiology. But before I do so, let me share a story with you. I was in London this morning, and I was worried about getting here on time. So I'm rushing off to the airport. I'm in the airport. I go through security. I notice I'm going to be possibly late. I won't have time to eat. I grab a sandwich. I go. I sit in the plane. I take my sandwich, and I bite into my sandwich. And surprise, surprise, there was an incredibly sour and bitter lemon in my sandwich. So as I bite into my sandwich, I get this sour taste everywhere in my mouth. Now, why do I tell you this story? Because many of you will find that you've started to salivate. Your mouth is starting to secrete saliva, and you didn't bite the lemon, I did. This is what makes us so exceptional as animals. We have this incredible ability to communicate at an individual level and also at a group level. And what neuroscience is helping us to understand is part of these patterns and these scripts that drive our interactions and how they can be used for peace and for peace building. So with my colleagues at NeuroAwareness and at the Center for Effective Sciences here at the University of Geneva, we've come up with basically 10 neuro principles that seem to influence and direct social behavior, especially in conflict. And we're trying to understand the neurobiology of conflict and how to negotiate and also resolve conflicts as mediators in situations of conflict. And we learned from that that there are 7 key junctures, 7 key moments where we can change lots of things by changing these patterns and building on the patterns that are innate in all of us biologically. Now, I obviously won't have time to go through all of this with you today. We can't go through the 10 neuro principles, and we won't be able to go through the 7 key kind of components. But I did want to speak to you today about 3 things. I do want to cover with you briefly, in 3 minutes, the evolution of the human brain. I then want to talk to you very quickly about how this creates in us 2 basic patterns of behavior that I'm going to refer to as in-group scripts of behavior, when we feel that we're within our clique, within our community, and out-of-group scripts of behavior, and how we behave when we see ourselves as belonging to a group that's different from the other group, which are innate in us. And then thirdly, what I'm going to do is talk about process, and how the process itself is part of the problem. Because what we've used in terms of history, what we tend to use when we have conflict, is we tend to drive and promote out-of-group scripts. It's us versus them. Those who are right, those who are wrong. And part of that creates escalation of conflict and prevents us from using our brains optimally. All right? So that's an overview of what I'd like to cover with you today. So let's first of all talk about the brain and the evolution of the human brain. If you take your fist and you put your thumb in your hand and you close it like this, you have a human brain. So you can now look at your hand and say, I have my brain in front of me. The bottom of your brain is called the brain stem. That's where we have conserved reflexes that we call even the reptilian brain system. That's where we store our reflexes for fight, flight, and freeze. And obviously, when the body thinks it's under attack, that part of the brain gets all the oxygen and glucose. Where the thumb is, the middle part of the brain, is called the limbic system. That's the emotional center of the brain. And basically, emotions occur in mammals, and they help us to bind as a community, as a clique. The idea of caring for our young is emotionally driven. Fear, anger, reward, all of these things are very quickly filtered in the limbic system. In fact, when we perceive anything, we first tend to perceive it through the limbic system. And then depending on whether it thinks there's a reward or a threat, it will allow oxygen glucose to really activate the reptilian part, or, and now we get to the third part of the brain, where the fingers are, the cortical part, or the neocortex. So we've had the reptilian brain, the limbic system in the middle, and on the outside, we have the cortex or the neocortex. And that is what allows us to do high-order cognitive thinking. In fact, our brains are larger than those of chimps, or any other mammal, proportionally, in the neocortex, especially the prefrontal cortex. And why? Because our brain evolved to be social animals. Our clique size is larger than any others. On average, 10 individuals form a clique in humans. The closest are around 5, 6. That's a big change, and it also explains in part speech and our ability to interact through even mirror neurons. Mirror neurons being the kind of neurons that I activated in you when I told you about lemons and my experience with a lemon. So these are the different parts of the brain. And what do they already tell us? When a person is very angry and is very upset, oxygen and glucose is going to probably a combination of the emotional part of the brain or the reptilian part of the brain. But oxygen and glucose are limited resources in the brain. So how much gets to go to prefrontal cortex or to cortical thinking, to high-order kind of cognitive and abstractive thinking? Very little. So when a person is very angry in front of you, and you say, be reasonable, be logical, it's physiologically impossible for them to do so. Because the oxygen and glucose have not reached those patterns, those networks in the brain that can be activated with glucose and oxygen. Likewise, if you have a person who's very concentrating doing a Sudoku puzzle, or they're doing their taxes on a spreadsheet, and you ask them how emotional they feel about the number 5, it's very difficult for them to feel an emotion about that number. Because the other parts of the brain, the cognitive part of the brain, is being fed oxygen and glucose. That's how our brains have evolved. And in fact, if we want to think about the brain as an analogy, let's look at it as a computer system. The brain is our hardware. But unlike Apple or Microsoft, where there might be one basic operating system, there are 3 operating systems present. One of them is going to be social, the other one is going to be emotional, and the other one is going to be cognitive. But we need to look at the process as part of the problem. When we have a conflict, the first thing we tend to do is think of us versus them. We are right. When people disagree with us, we get frustrated, our emotions kick in. And so what do we do next? We will then go and create coalitions. We'll try and get power. We will try and influence the other. But the other will not react the way we want them to. So now they're a threat. And as they get to a threat, our limbic systems get more and more activated. Our reptilian systems are now kicking in. And we deprive our brain of the ability to be creative, to be collaborative, and to use those natural, innate scripts that we have of empathy. Empathy is reduced when people view the others as out of group. Empathy can only happen neurobiologically, optimally, when we consider ourselves and perceive ourselves to be in group. And I'd like to end on that note, because I think that's where the United Nations, that's where our societies, that's where the future of peace can be found. In trying to design new processes that do not involve naming and shaming and blaming, saying who is right or wrong. And believe me, I'm not being utopian here. I do hard-nosed, tough business and intercultural disputes where people are extremely angry and do not want to be in the same room with one another. But if we stop thinking about us versus them, if we stop priming people by saying defendant, plaintiff, if we think differently about rapporteurs or UN panels of inquiry, fact-finding missions, as trying to find who is responsible and who is blamed, which creates out-of-group structures and behavior, we might get to a more optimal use of the cognitive parts of our brain. And if we look at that, we have to start looking at every single conflict and every process for conflict from a social perspective, an emotional perspective, and a cognitive perspective. And mediation is one of the ways that allows that to happen. Because when you are in mediation, what you try and do is get people thinking as a team. We no longer think about our positions, who is right and wrong. We will focus on our interests and our mutual interests. If we use the Harvard Getting to Yes model, we'll be primed, all of us, to looking for rewards, looking for needs and interests and options that address mutual needs and interests. And with that, we can prime the best in-group thinking. We can get creativity going. We can have natural empathy occurring. We can have slow and proper use of our cognitive function and not have them hijacked by emotions or reptilian brains. So that was it in a nutshell that I wanted to share with you today. I see that this is creeping into the international discussions. I see governments beginning to prepare with this logic and this technology, with this understanding of the human brain in mind. And although it might sound very strange to you, I think it's an exciting thing for the future and for peace. So thank you very much for the opportunity of being able to share this with you today. And good luck to all of us. May we live in a better world. Thank you.